Hello, folks. This is Andrew Gilmore with another episode of Mostly Movies, Maybe Music. And first of all, I want to thank everyone who watched my first show last week. And thanks to Samantha Glasser for being a great first guest. And I got a lot of very nice feedback on that interview. So that certainly encourages me to do more. So thank you for that. And today we're talking about movies again, but from a different perspective because my guest is a professional screenwriter. He's been writing screenplays for about 30 years, has written over 60 screenplays, so he certainly knows a lot about that subject. And has a passion for movies in general, and there are all kinds of movie related things that we can talk about. And he's also a teacher. He teaches screenwriting and also teaches film history, which is something we have in common, and his name is David Greenberg. And it's funny how I came to know Dave because he used to work in my father's bookstore when I was a child, and so I knew Dave when I was about 12 years old. And then when I was a teenager, well, I guess he moved on to other things. He wasn't in the store anymore, so we lost touch for a while. And then just recently, within the past year or so, we became friends again and reconnected in my adult life, and that's really been a wonderful thing because it seems like we have a lot in common. We're pretty like-minded about a lot of things, and it's really like no time has passed since I was a child. We just reconnected immediately, and I've had a lot of fun conversations through email and in Dave's car on the way to horror conventions and that kind of thing. So today we get to share one of those conversations with you, whoever's watching out there. So I knew when I came up with the idea of starting a podcast that Dave would be a natural choice for a guest. So here he is. So, Dave, it's good to have you here. Thank you for being on the show.
Oh, you are so welcome. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm so excited. I remember you talking about thinking about doing a podcast, and I thought that's a great idea. And now look at it. You're doing a podcast.
Well, you might not be so thrilled half an hour from now, but we'll see.
We'll see.
So I told you I mostly want to stick to the things we have in common. I want to sort of
hmm
compare notes on things.
Sure.
So let's just start with teaching. When did you start teaching?
I started teaching. Well, very interestingly, both my parents were teachers. And I saw how hard they worked, and I said to myself, I never want to do that. And then it just kind of fell into my lap. So I started teaching high school film production and film studies in 1999.
Yeah, so that's what, 26 years now. That's quite a track record.
Wow. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking about the different personalities that you encounter in teaching, and I'm sure in terms of screenwriting, I'm sure some people come in with ideas for things that they want to write, and some people probably are there but they don't have ideas, and you have to talk them through it, and
hmm
probably a lot of stages in between those two extremes. So what's your process for coaching people through developing their ideas?
Sure. It really depends on where they are. And I have a screenwriting class, a community screenwriting class, as opposed to one tied to an academic institution. I have one of those starting in a few weeks, the end of the month.
Right.
And I just don't know who I'm going to get, what level they're at. So I've had to be able to be all things to all people. For instance, I am currently going into the third week of an introduction to screenwriting class at Drexel University. And in this particular case, on the first day of class, I knew that I had a lot of screenwriting majors in the class taking their first screenwriting class, at least their first college screenwriting class. And I knew that many of them probably had ideas that they wanted to do. But I have found that for the purposes of introduction to screenwriting, I've found as a screenwriter, coming up with an idea for me is the hardest thing. So in this
Yeah.
particular class, they don't come up with ideas. They adapt existing works. I
Uh-huh.
hand out a collection of short stories that they choose from, just so that they can practice learning 3-act structure and all
Right.
that stuff without, necessarily the advanced topics like coming up with a character structure and all that stuff.
So what are some of the things that you show them to follow as examples?
The stories or
Yeah.
just in general? Oh, Gosh, I have over the years I've used some classics. One of my favorite stories to use is an O. Henry story called A Retrieved Reformation. Um, just because even though obviously written in 1901 or 1903 when it was written, it was not designed to be adapted into a movie, but the character arc in the story really exemplifies what we are traditionally in the conventional model looking for in a story, a
Right.
character who grows and changes.
Yeah. So, what can you comment on the development that you've seen in your students when compared to when they first come in and then they develop something, and what
Sure.
kind of progress have you seen?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I mean, I one of my students just released his debut writing directing debut feature. This is a student I've had for 4 or 5 classes. I also had a student, an adult student, a woman 20 years older than me, who took my continuing ed class a number of times. I mean, maybe 10 times. And
Well,
in that
you
class,
said an adult student. I was going to make some joke about her writing adult films, but I'll let that
no,
go.
not, not at all. We can talk about writing adult films later. I have a funny story,
No,
but
I
I
try
don't.
to keep it clean on this show,
Let's
but
keep it clean.
I'm sorry.
This, yeah, well, okay, yeah, I won't even go there. Anyway, so this woman wrote the screenplay and had it produced into a feature film that's coming out later this year. So, and on the flip side, though, I will say there's been some students I've had who I they didn't need me, and you assess and evaluate where a student is. This one particular there's the it's January 2025 right now, and I believe there is this new Jason Statham action movie shooting in England that was written by one of my students. And in this particular case, I said this person doesn't need anything from me.
Hmm.
There was nothing I could teach this young woman.
Okay, well, at least in some cases, it sounds like you've made a difference, so that's good.
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
Well, I will say, in the case of the young woman who I don't think needed to learn anything from me, she did need feedback and encouragement,
yeah.
and even though I couldn't teach her anything, we could refine things, and she can come to me with an opinion.
So, are there times when it's difficult for the students, where you feel like they're just struggling to develop their ideas and it's not working?
Sure. But that's kind of the process. I think it's difficult for most people. If somebody, and this is just my own opinion, if somebody's not struggling with the story, I don't think they're doing it right.
Yeah, well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So, if somebody is struggling, what do you think they get out of the class by the end of it?
I like to think that they have skills and resources. And I guess I like to be a friendly, nurturing force who
Sure.
just, who says, it's funny, that defies most logic, but I often think of myself as an athlete playing sports. And there's just some days I've got my stuff, some days I don't. Some days I have a good game, sometimes I don't.
Well, I was going to refer to you as coaching people through their screenplays, so that's appropriate.
That is, yeah, that is.
So, I was going to move to the next topic, but is there anything
Sure.
else you want to comment on about your classes?
No, last week the semester just began, and I ran into the head of the program after the first session of my introduction to screenwriting class. And he said, "How was it? How are the kids? How's it going?" And I said it went well. And I have literally I've been teaching at this particular institution for now over 20 years, and I think I've taught over 100 sections of introduction to screenwriting. And I know screenwriting teachers who beg to not teach that class anymore, who find it tedious and boring. Not me. I love teaching the basics. I love being the one who kind of sets the foundation for where they're going to go. So I
Sure.
really enjoy it.
So you reminded me what my next question was, which is
Okay.
that, well, obviously you've had a lot of experience with reading screenplays as well as writing them, and what do you look for? Are there certain traits that you see in a script that can tell you whether it's working or not working?
That's a good question. And I just said in class on Thursday, there's this unwritten rule in the business where anybody will read the first 10 pages
Right.
of a screenplay. And if after 10 pages it doesn't do X, Y, and Z, it doesn't tick certain box,
Yep.
following the conventional model, mind you, they they are free to stop reading it. And so I've been doing this long enough. I can tell on page one whether a writer has it or not.
Mm.
But to your bigger question, really interesting. Um, I have to evaluate every screenplay on an individual basis.
Right.
So if somebody is writing a big action shoot 'em up car chase explosion movie, I ask myself, is this a good shoot 'em up action car chase movie?
Right.
They can be done, those can be done very well, they can be done very badly. If somebody's writing a rom-com, I say is a good rom-com. So I have to take each case individually. You have to understand what the writer is trying to do and then adjust your critical apparatus to the particular project, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Right. Judge it for what it is, not by
Exactly.
somebody
Right.
else's standards.
So, a shoot 'em up, there are very few shoot 'em up action-packed action films that anybody would qualify as a quote unquote art film.
Right.
So they're not trying to be art films. I like art films, but guess what? I also like shoot 'em up action movies too.
Sure. So if you can sometimes tell by page one what if you can judge the merit of something by page one, then is there an example of a first page that really got you?
Well, there's been first pages that I can tell on page one the person needs work.
Yeah.
I try not to say, I actually really do try not to say this is a good screenplay or well, if a screenplay is good, I will say it's good. If it's if it needs work, I will say it needs work. I never call a screenplay bad. And if you'll allow me, I'll give you a little anecdote that I
Sure.
think you might know and will definitely relate to. Casablanca is widely regarded as one of the greatest screenplays ever written. But Casablanca started out as a play that was deemed so bad that they pulled it from circulation. It was going through previews, as they call it, touring the country in anticipation of a Broadway run. And the powers that be just lost confidence in it and said, you know what, this is just not going to work. Let's cut our losses. So they pulled the plug on it. For some reason, a Hollywood producer hears about this quote unquote bad play, pays $50,000 for the rights to it, and $50,000 in 1940 was a lot of money, hires, well, twin brothers, screenwriters, to rewrite it. Then they made it into more of a comedy. Then he hired another guy to rewrite the rewrite, and he made it into more of a political thriller. Then they hired yet another writer to do a rewrite of the rewrite, and he made it into more of a romance. And that's how you get the greatest screenplay ever written. You
Right.
just keep working at it. So I never say a screenplay is bad. I say a screenplay needs more work.
So what's a sign to you that something needs more work?
Unbelievable characters, unbelievable dialogue, awkward structure, pacing, and just a sense of whether it has met its full potential or not. And it's just a feeling you get from having watched a lot of movies, written a lot of movies, and read a lot of screenplays. You can tell if if there's something in there that still needs some some nurturing.
Right. It kind of reminds me of comedy writers that I've listened to, like people who worked for Johnny Carson. They could give him 100 jokes, and he could just go through them and go, "This one works. This one doesn't work." He just knew
Exactly.
instinctively what to
Yep.
do.
Yep. That's a great example.
Yeah. So I'll switch topics a little bit. I want to stay on teaching, but
Sure.
let's talk about teaching film history because we share
Mm.
that.
Yeah.
And you told me, well, I guess let's start with, because it sounds like you started teaching screenwriting. So then when did you start teaching film history?
Well, okay. So I first started teaching general film. So this high school class I taught was a little bit of production, a little bit of film appreciation, a little bit of film history. But in terms of formally teaching film history, that would have been about 2007, 2008. I taught a class called American Classic Cinema, and I'm teaching a version of that now,
Yeah,
except not all American.
right. I started in 2009, so it's around
Yeah,
the
I was
same
around the
time.
same time. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow,
but
you're young. But you're a lifer. I mean, you're like me. I've been into this since I was little, and I imagine you have as I mean, I knew you when you were, 9, 10, 11, 12, and you had these interests. So,
yeah,
yeah, we've had a while to do our research.
yeah, it was a more, I think it was a more gradual evolution for me, and I talked about that on the last show with Samantha. But
Hmm.
anyway, it took, I think I always was interested in movies, but I think it took a long time for me to really get into studying it seriously. But
Yeah.
anyway, back to you. You told me about showing It Happened One Night to your students and how they loved it, but
Yeah.
what are some other examples of classic films that you've shown to your
Sure.
students? And
Well, this just this past week in class, and I'm still kind of on an elated high from it. I showed Murnau's Sunrise.
oh yes,
Um, and I mean that's a breathtaking film on
yes,
so many levels, and they liked it. So these 18, 19, 20, 21 year olds in 2025 are seeing this 100-year-old film, and maybe I'm cynical and jaded and I think, oh, all they do is watch TikTok and whatever. How are they going to be able to sit through a 2 hour black and white silent film? But they do, and they like it, and it
it's the story.
it's the story. Well, it's the story, yes, but the production, the shooting, the set design,
Yeah.
even the title cards were really interesting.
Hmm.
And the title cards, well, one, it was interesting that it had below average number of title
Right.
cards. And so to be able to analyze it and get their reactions and explain things to them, I just find so rewarding. I was just bouncing off the walls after that class.
Were there specific comments that they made that you could share?
Um, Well, not so I showed it this week. I showed it last semester too. And this was at an all-girls school too. And they had some comments about some of the ethics. Um, and
Yeah.
it is a movie in part about muddy and messy ethics, but
Yeah.
how, you know, here's the guy plotting to kill his wife, deciding not to, and keep keeping it a secret and living happily ever after. That's kind of interesting.
I think it
So
does. Uh,
students mentioned that.
I think it does stretch believability a little bit. I don't think you would forgive someone who tried to kill you that quickly, but
Right. Here's my, so you're familiar with that. And actually, one of my students came up with a good answer, but there's that character who in the credits is credited as the woman from the city.
right.
And we know she's bad because she wears all black. She has a short, severe bob haircut, and she smokes cigarettes. And everybody who fits that description is obviously a bad person. But I wanted to know is she's the woman from the city, but what is she doing on this island
Well,
where
that's a
she's
good question. Yeah.
wildly out of place? Somebody actually made the point that it looks like she's visiting somebody.
Right.
still. But still, why would she? She just seems so chic and urbane and maybe a little bit morally and ethically fluid. She just doesn't strike me as the type to go to the country.
Well, if she weren't there, there'd be no movie. So,
Exactly, exactly. Really good point.
yeah. So, yeah, actually, I'm showing Sunrise next semester.
Are you really?
I'm doing a whole course on, well, I've done silent comedy before, so this time I'm focusing on silent drama specifically.
Ooh. I don't want
Yeah.
to. Oh, because we're in touch other than the podcast. Because I
Yeah.
mean, we essentially, for the folks at home, we we basically live around the corner from each other. But I'm going to want to hear more about that class,
Yeah,
silent.
absolutely.
I don't want to. I don't want to take too much time out of your podcast episode,
Sure.
but I want to know what you're showing. But boy, you can't do much better than Sunrise.
Yeah. And I'm saving it for, I think, the next to last film or something. I'm building to it.
I'm just curious, and then I don't want it to turn into me
Yeah, I mean,
interviewing.
this is supposed to be
But
about you.
I know. But are in that class are you? Well, this is because we've been communicating
Yeah.
pretty regularly, and this is the
No,
first time.
nobody's watching this anyway. It doesn't
Right,
matter.
exactly. Yeah. Um, are you doing the films in chronological order or something?
No,
Okay.
I have a way of structuring them that I think is aesthetically interesting. So
Oh, great. All right. Well, we'll talk
yeah,
about that later. I'm actually really fascinated.
yeah, I'll tell you all about it
Okay.
later. So what else have you? Are there other examples of things that you've shown that they really like?
Yes, from day one, from this back to 1999, uh, when I was teaching high school students, um, I put on Singing in the Rain.
Yeah.
And I had this kid in the class, kind of an obnoxious kid. And when he realized it was going to be a musical, he was like, "Oh man, you're making us watch a musical and everything." By the end, by the end, at the final scene where you know what I'm talking about, the microphone and the singing
Yeah.
and the lip syncing and everything, I looked over to him. He was on the edge of his seat, eyes wide, going like this. He said, "Oh, this is going to be good." So he was completely won over.
Oh, that's terrific.
Um, and then I showed another time. Um, I showed I showed what for the sake of argument, I will call my favorite film, and that's Orson Welles' Touch of Evil. And um, this kid, this 16, 17-year-old kid is like, wow, that was a good shot. And this 14, 15-year-old girl, a couple seats down to him, just said, almost like she was in a trance, she said, there are a lot of good shots in this movie.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I'm sharing something with these kids.
Yeah. Well, that's terrific.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really rewarding.
Yeah. I mean, I can relate to that. Of course, when my classes work, they really work.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the coin, are there things that they really didn't like particularly, or can you elaborate on the reasons why they might not have?
Okay. Well, here's a really tricky one. Um, I think I will say I think every really good, exciting, inventive fill in the blank film um of the last 65 years or so, give or take, um, owes something to Godard's Breathless. Um, Breathless, here's the thing. I'm not actually the biggest fan of Jean-Luc Godard as a filmmaker, but as a
I've never seen any of his films.
oh, okay. Yeah, I can't imagine they're exactly up your alley, but what he did was so groundbreaking, so much for the time, and it's so inspiring to me. But Breathless is wildly misogynistic,
Hmm.
and I don't want to damn all French men out there, but this is a French guy making a film, and there's attractive women being used as objects and that kind of thing. And so that did not sit well with some of my female students. They
Right.
recognized some of the technical accomplishments of the film. They recognized why I was showing it, even though it's a little hard to swallow in 2025, 2024.
Right. Well, that's something I was going to bring up anyway, since you're touching on that, because did you know John Serpentelli? You mentioned him at
Yeah.
one point.
Hmm.
Yeah, and he mentioned that in terms of teaching film history, you have to start with Birth of a Nation, and then there's The Jazz Singer, and those are both very problematic. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
what's your approach to trying to teach problematic films?
That's a tough one. Last time I taught film history, I was showing a film. I might be getting it wrong. It was a film. Okay, I can't remember the specific film, but it was by Oscar Micheaux, who I don't know if you're familiar with Oscar Micheaux.
Just slightly.
Okay, so he was what's generally accepted to be the first prominent black filmmaker.
Right.
Um, the funny thing is, and I mean this with all due respect, while he is notable for being a black man carving out a niche for himself in the, the film world, I mean, he was never a Hollywood filmmaker or anything. But even the people, even his biggest supporters, acknowledge that he was just not a very good filmmaker. So the fact that he made films was good. But anyway, I had a student write to me before class and say, I see on the schedule we're scheduled to watch this film. It might have been The Blood of Jesus. Although don't quote me on that. But she said, as a African American woman, I feel that watching a movie about slavery and racism in the South would be triggering for me. And I wrote back and I pointed out to her, but this film was written and directed by a black man, and the lead character is a Harvard educated black man. And she still said, I still feel it would be too emotional. And I try to respect that. And I actually had a hard time. And I pointed out that, hey, you know what? When I was in film school, who was Jewish, had to watch Nazi propaganda.
Right.
I had to watch Leni Riefenstahl
Yes.
films. And guess what? I survived.
Yeah.
And don't be, I hate to sound like such an old guy, and then I don't have a conservative bone in my body, but I'm kind of like, don't be a snowflake.
Back in my
You
day,
can
we
watch.
watched the Nazi
Right.
movies.
Right. And now, so the interesting thing is, so in this particular class I'm teaching right now, we show one film in class, and then they have a film to watch at home. And
Right.
so in this particular case, the other film, and again, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it was directed by, I know you're familiar with Amos and Andy,
Sure.
right? So this was written and directed by one of them. I can't remember. It's a beautiful, intelligent, serious film. It's a really, really good film, far better than Oscar Micheaux. Um, and I think that resonated with people.
Yeah, I know. There are a lot of very tricky things we have to
Right.
deal with these days.
So yeah, sometimes I try, there's trigger warnings, and I will say I feel like today's students are particularly sensitive and fear being triggered and whatnot, and I try to respect that. But I also, if something's going to be controversial these days, it's just safer to play it safe.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing about my classes is that I'm not well, I'm not teaching history in the conventional sense, so I don't have to show, I don't have to show Birth of a Nation or
Hmm.
the milestone films. Everything I do is really cherry picked, and I just show movies that I like, and
Yeah.
I do the deeper cut films. And if something does have offensive content in it, then I can just choose not to show it.
Yeah,
That's
sometimes I wish I could do that. The current class I'm teaching now, I'm sort of taking over for the professor who usually teaches it. So he's chosen all the films. The class I taught last semester at another institution, I built that class up from scratch and I got to choose the films. And they're not always, I mean, yeah, they're not always films that I like, but films I feel like I have to show. For instance, I'm not the biggest fan of Hitchcock's Vertigo.
mhm.
but I understand why it gets shown in film school and stuff like that. And it just seemed to fit the class. So I put that in. And even things like I don't like last year at Marienbad as much as I feel I should, but it's significant and in the context of teaching film history at an art school, it has a place. And the students actually do kind of sort of get into it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that one.
No, I haven't.
Mm,
I just remembered another example of something that I've had to deal with recently that you might find interesting. That
what's that?
well, I try to be sensitive to my students, and there was a guy that came to one of my classes last year, and I always email my students before the class starts so I can get to know them a little bit. So that
Mm,
because I'm teaching from home, so there are people coming to my doorstep, and I don't want them to be total strangers the first day, so I'll talk to them beforehand.
that's a good idea.
Yeah. And this one guy emailed me and I asked him to tell me about himself. And he mentioned, I don't know why he felt the need to tell me something this personal, but he said that he had PTSD from being in Vietnam.
Oh,
And I was teaching Lubish at the time, and I realized that two of the Lubish films I was showing were war movies. So I thought, wait a minute, how is this guy going to feel? I don't want him having flashbacks or anything.
sure. Yeah.
So I had to tell him, I'm showing these two war movies, and if you want to not attend the class on those two dates, then I'll understand your reason for doing that. And he did skip those classes, but I think
Mm,
it's just an example of how I have to learn to adapt to other people's needs.
sure. Yeah, yeah. No, that was very good of you. I like that. I have a new class starting and somebody contacted me about it. I said, "Oh, when is it? Blah blah blah, all this stuff." And he's like, "I really want to check it out, so maybe I'll sign up." And I said, "Great, you're welcome to sign up." And he wound up sending me a friend request on Facebook, so I accepted it. Only to discover, let's see, without getting into too much detail, he is at the wildly extreme opposite of the political spectrum
Hmm.
as I am. I find a lot of his views reprehensible and offensive, and now he might be in my class.
Oh yeah, I've been through that too.
Yeah, so and the thing is, I try to treat everybody as people, and if he's taking my class to talk about screenwriting and learn screenwriting, I can teach him screenwriting. But if he starts to get off topic, um, it could be a problem.
Yeah. Well, good luck. I hope you can navigate that.
Thanks. I like to think of myself as a pretty flexible, nice guy.
Yeah. Well, you are a nice guy, and I'm
Oh,
sure you
thanks.
can be diplomatic in situations like that.
I'm not that worried.
Yeah. So I'll switch to a lighter subject because I know you've also taught comedy. So
Mm.
first of all, I just wanted to ask you what some of your favorite comedy films are because you know that's something that I know a lot
Oh,
about.
wow. One of my favorite comedy films. Okay. Mm. Okay. I think this says a lot about me. I mean, I like comedy, of course, as a spectrum. Um, I do have a big spot in my heart for dark comedy.
Sure.
So not just comedy, not just favorite comedy film, but easily in my top three favorite films of all time is Martin Scorsese's After Hours.
Yes.
You've seen that, right?
Yeah, we talked about it
Yeah, we
before.
did talk about that. Um, I know people who think that's a horror film, and I see their point. I crack up. I never get tired of it. So that is in my top three favorite films, period, of all time. And I guess along those lines, I would have to put An American Werewolf in London, which
Sure.
is also not 100% comedy. I'm working on something right now. I don't have a lot of time to work on my own stuff because I get hired to write screenplays and I have to prioritize paying work. But I am working on something right now that takes a lot of inspiration from Airplane,
Sure.
the Zucker brothers, Abram Zucker.
Of course.
I'm using that as in fact, I'm calling it, Airplane meets blah blah blah. So,
I've never heard
uh,
of blah blah blah. Who directed that?
oh, blah 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 by so and so.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite director.
So other comedies, that's wow, that because I love comedy. I love to laugh. Office Space is really good from 1999. Um you know, and this is a really dangerous, difficult thing to say, and I'm gonna say it, and it
Uh-oh.
yeah, I know. Because I have
I might
really
have to throw
mixed
you
feelings
out,
about
David.
it. I know. Um I feel like much of modern comedy, the latter quarter of the 20th century owes a lot to Annie Hall, to
Yeah,
Woody
yeah,
Allen's Annie Hall. And, I was not a huge fan of Annie Hall when I first saw it. Well, I was a kid and I didn't understand it. I saw it again a few years ago as an adult. Um, I still don't love it, but I get it. There'd be no Seinfeld without Annie Hall.
right. Yeah,
So
I
that,
like it, but I'm not crazy about it. Yeah,
And it's hard to because you know, there's these people. I was thinking about it too the other day, and I know this isn't 100% on topic, but because I know you comedy, and I hope this doesn't reflect on me badly, but some of my biggest influences are Woody Allen and seeing Bill Cosby live
hmm,
had a profound effect on my writing. It was so Bill Cosby was very inspirational to me, and I know his name is Mud now, and
yeah.
I actually think it's a great tragedy. I don't think he was a bad guy. I think Bill Cosby was probably a good guy who just got corrupted by fame.
Well, I'm
But
not going to go there.
yeah, that's a whole other topic. But
Yeah.
anyway, so yeah, so Woody Allen has been a big influence on me. But yeah, in terms of other comedies, drawing a blank. I'll have to think about that. No one's ever asked me that.
Oh, well, there you go. This is an
Yeah.
exclusive first, ladies and
All
gentlemen.
right. Huh. I'm gonna be up all night thinking what comedies do I like?
Hmm.
Some of the early um again, here's controversial. I like Young Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Not a huge Mel Brooks fan, especially his later stuff.
Well, he was actually a big influence on me, and we
Hmm.
watch Young Frankenstein every Halloween.
Okay. I mean, Young Frankenstein, you just can't hold. I mean, Young Frankenstein is brilliant. I think in part because it has a real story as opposed to many of his other films like History of the World, and especially, I know a lot of people love this. I just never got into Spaceballs. They just feel like a series of skits, kind of sketch stitched together.
Yeah, well, he wrote for Sid Caesar, of course,
Right,
and that's
exactly.
his mindset.
Have you ever
Yeah.
seen, I'm sure you've seen, have you ever seen My Favorite Year?
Yes, I just saw it maybe a year ago or
Okay, that's a
pretty
great,
recently.
such a great film. Now, I think he actually produced that film.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So and I like him as a person. I loved his stand-up.
Yes.
I loved him and Carl Reiner. But anyway, yeah, comedy.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been watching the Dick Van Dyke Show recently. Speaking of Carl Reiner, but
Oh, really? Oh,
that's a
yeah, yeah, sure.
that's a side note. Uh,
I have really strong feelings about comedy. I am, as we speak right now, I am actually looking at my autographed photo of Steve Martin,
oh
who is an
wow.
idol of mine. I love Steve Martin. I always say the key to knowing me is that in 1977, I was 12. I waited in line to see Star Wars the weekend it opened. I listened to a lot of Steve Martin, and I went to a Kiss concert. And
Hmm.
that just about sums me up. But I've overall largely been really disappointed in Steve Martin's movie work. Um, I'm not a big fan of most of his films, even though I just think he's so brilliant and what he did with stand-up was so revolutionary. I don't think it ever really translated. Although one of my favorites, okay, this might be up there with best comedies, and I'd be shocked and saddened if you hadn't seen it. Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid.
Yes, it's been a long time, but I saw it when I was a kid.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. Now that's a good
Yeah,
one. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. I remember liking The Man with Two Brains. I thought that was funny.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. But overall, even stuff like, that he was so acclaimed for, um, um, I'm drawing a blank. Well, it'll come to me.
Well, I haven't seen a lot of his movies. I've seen a few, so I can't really comment that much.
Yeah.
How did you get a signed picture of him? Did you write to him?
No, honestly, somebody gave it to me as a gift. They found it on
Oh,
eBay. Yeah,
you know,
which it's remarkable because Steve Martin notoriously reportedly does not give autographs.
yeah, I'm not surprised.
Hmm.
I've heard he can be kind of standoffish, which is not surprising when you're that famous.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's funny because he's doing a thing where he's selling autographed books now, and I was thinking of getting one for you, and now I don't have to. So,
Okay. Wow. His book, have you read his book on stand-up?
yes, it's been a few years with
Yeah.
that also,
I,
but
I I I keep it by my bedside. Now that
oh,
is stunning. Steve Martin is a comic scientist. He
right,
really understands the science of comedy, the psychology of comedy, and he really gets me thinking because if you analyze a lot of his jokes, if you break them down, they're technically not very funny. But what's funny about them is he presents them as comedy in such a way that you think they're funny. And
right, his
it's
attitude.
right, it's
Yeah,
it's it's really, really kind of high level intellectual stuff. And maybe that's why I've always been so disappointed with his film career is because I just know he's capable of so much more, so much more material that works on a higher intellectual level. And I
right,
realize there's not as much of a market for that as there is for the jerk.
right. Did you see the documentary about him? We were talking about that before.
Can I tell you? I didn't like it.
Hmm,
I didn't think
really?
I didn't think it was that well made. I actually didn't finish it. I feel like I should. I was so looking forward to it, but I found it a little flat. So that's just me.
So I still enjoyed it, but I can see where you're coming from.
Speaking of documentaries, though, I'm looking forward to, I think it just came out this week. There's a four-part documentary about the first 50 years of Saturday Night Live
Oh, I didn't know that.
that I'm looking forward to.
Oh, that should be
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it should be good. I mean, I've heard mixed things about it, but I figure even if it's not a good documentary, it's a good way to visit some of those old sketches and maybe things I'd forgotten about and behind the scenes stuff. I don't know if you saw the recent movie called Saturday Night.
no, my parents did. I didn't.
Yeah, I wasn't crazy about it, but
Yeah,
I
they didn't
just,
like it either, so I
oh,
guess
good,
I'll skip
good.
it.
I was worried that they would have, and we'd have to argue if I ever saw them. But yeah, I
Yeah.
was I was really not impressed.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't like those kind of movies that try to recreate things from the past and having
Hmm.
actors playing real people. That always turns me off.
Um, it's definitely a different thing. Yeah. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
I guess.
when there's still footage of John Belushi out there that you can watch, then it's hard to, I don't want to see an actor playing John Belushi. It doesn't really
Yeah,
work.
right, right. I know it is kind of strange when you see actors playing people. I mean, the idea that there's in current release, there's a movie about Bob Dylan who's
Right.
still alive.
Yes.
It seems odd. I don't know. There have been, of course, biopics made throughout time, but I think it's only in the last, and I could be wrong, and you might be able to correct me here. The idea of doing biopics about people who are still alive seems relatively new.
No, there were some in the 50s. There was the Buster Keaton story and a couple of things like that.
Okay. And I don't know if Glenn Miller was alive when the Glenn Miller story.
No, he wasn't.
I didn't think so.
And oh, the Jolson story, which was big in the 40s. Yeah, that would have been, I guess, the first biopic probably.
Yeah, you're right. One of my father's best friends growing up produced the Buddy Holly story.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that was cool.
So I want to move on to other subjects, but I
Sure.
was just going to mention that in one of the interviews that I watched for research for this, you mentioned that you wanted to be a comedian at some point, and that was interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I dabbled in stand-up. It's funny, I was thinking about it just the other day, not knowing that it was going to come up in this conversation. But and I know it sounds like a cop out, but I could never really fully throw myself into stand-up. And like I say, this is going to sound like a cop out. It's because I took it too seriously. I could not, well, on one level, I couldn't find my niche, my shtick, my
Yeah.
you have to have a brand as a comedian, and I just felt like I couldn't. Um, I just didn't think I could do stand-up comedy to the standard I felt I should be held to, and so I didn't do it. I will say that even as recently as this morning, um, I've contemplated a return to the form with modifications. So there is a comedian who I generally like. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. His name is Gary Goldman,
No, I don't know
and
him.
he has a clear adoration for language. He just loves to play with words and clearly highly intelligent. The interesting thing is, and I mean this in all respect, Gary, if you happen to be watching this, um, I think in the stand-up routines I've seen him do, the sum of the parts is not as good as the whole, or whatever the expression is. Like
Hmm.
individual bits work, but as a coherent, consistent, unified piece of stagecraft, I felt his material was lacking. And I wonder if maybe he has done that, felt that too, because his current project is a one-man show that has elements of stand-up comedy in it, but it also has elements of drama and harsh realities of his biography. And I, in fact, had written a very similar piece for myself, a one-man show about 8 years ago that had lots of comedy in it, but also had lots of pathos and gravitas.
Hmm.
And I've been thinking about dusting that off and trying to do something with that.
Okay, well, if it's ever staged, you know you have at least one audience member that'll come, so
Okay, that's good. I will count on you. I'm going to hold you to that.
it's a one-man show for a one-man audience. Maybe,
There you
yeah,
go.
it's a new concept.
Yeah.
So there are a couple other things I want to talk about, and
Sure.
we've gone on about comedy a lot here.
Yeah,
But just getting back to teaching, I think I saw on your Facebook page that you taught acting at one point. I didn't know
I
that.
did. Yeah. Oh, well, I started out, I want to say I started, I don't know. Um, I I guess I know the first play I did was in second grade, so I would have been about 6 years old, 7 years old. But it had been something that had been brewing in me for a long time. I've always been fascinated by acting and actors, and we've talked about this a lot, life on stage and life off stage, backstage, on stage. Um, and so yeah, in adulthood, a couple opportunities. Um, arose that had me able to teach acting, which um, I think I enjoyed. Wow, I just glanced over and my eye just fell on a book on my shelf in front of me called Directing Actors.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so
So what was that experience like?
um, in general, okay. I don't think I was ever dealing with serious students.
Hmm.
Um, One, at first, I was dealing with high school students who were taking an elective, and it was just, you could tell some of them were serious about the arts and acting, but others were just doing it as an elective credit and just thought, it was easier than math or chemistry. Um, then I did it. I actually did it at an acting school or a modeling school, and that could be difficult because even as when I got the job, they told me that only about a third of their students actually want to pursue acting.
Hmm.
Some are taking acting classes to improve their self-confidence. Others, in many cases, were foreign-born
Hmm.
students who were looking to get rid of their accents.
Right.
And so it was not an 100% rewarding experience just because I felt like I wasn't always dealing with serious actors. And, I'm not trained as an acting teacher. I only know what I have studied and picked up on myself through either listening to actors speak or acting myself, or in the few cases where I've had to direct actors. But I do have some thoughts and feelings about it, some strong thoughts and feelings about it. So it's not something I'm pursuing, but it's not something I would rule out.
Yeah, okay. So not one of the big highlights then.
No.
But yeah, it just interested me because I was a theater major, so I had a lot of
Right.
acting teachers.
Sure. Yeah. There's good ones and there's bad ones.
Yeah, you're telling me. I
That's
won't
what it
talk
is.
about the bad ones on the air,
Okay.
but
Well, okay. I should say there are people you connect with and people you clash with.
yes,
And I think
absolutely.
it's critical. And it's interesting. I know this going in a really wildly different direction. My older daughter, is a musician, and over the years, she's had a number of piano teachers. Some who just don't get her, and she doesn't get them. The chemistry's not there, and others who totally get her, and they work really well together. So it's really, really important, I think, to find the right teacher, the person you
Yes,
feel most comfortable with.
right. So I want to jump topics a little bit here and just get back to talking about some of the films that have inspired you. And you mentioned Touch of Evil. So what is it? Which is a great movie. I've seen it a
Mhm.
couple of times. So
Right.
what is it about that makes it your favorite?
Okay, that's again a tricky one. It's really hard for me to separate the actual movie from the backstory. So I am a huge, huge Orson Welles fan,
Sure.
and um, a complicated, difficult
Yeah.
character on a good day. This is a guy who's on the cover of Time magazine when he was 21, and by 42, people didn't even know he was alive.
Yeah.
He had fallen so far off the cultural radar. But future NRA president Charlton Heston was a rising star, and he'd been cast or contracted to do this movie Badge of Evil, but he was at a place in his career where he felt he could throw his muscle around, and he said, "I'll only do this movie if you get Orson Welles to direct it." And so they dug Orson Welles up. I think he was living in Europe or something, brought him over and said, "Hey, Orson, would you just do this stupid B movie for Charlton Heston?" And it's the kind of thing he could have slept walked through. He could have done the bare minimum and maybe had a final Hollywood hit, but he couldn't. He
Hmm.
couldn't put his talent in check. He rewrote it. It was later called Touch of Evil. Rewrote it, and brought so much to it technically, the sound recording, and of course the notorious, or not notorious, the infamous, the classic opening shot.
Yep.
So he could have just taken the easy way out and just cranked out a movie and been done with it, but he just couldn't help himself. He had to make a work of art.
Right.
And his character in the movie is the bad guy, and I don't think I've ever felt more sympathy for a bad guy in a movie. You feel really, he's 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 a bad guy, but he's avenging the murder of his wife.
Right.
So it's just amazing to look at, amazing to think that this guy had nothing to lose and everything to win, and could have just been a yes man. And this is a guy who had so many of his films taken away from him and finished by other filmmakers,
Yep.
partially his fault. I mean, he did have a large ego and a maybe not always efficient style of working. Um, So he shot himself in the foot quite a few times, but Touch of Evil could have just been an easy in, easy out, run-of-the-mill movie, and he wouldn't do it. He attacked it with all the creative energy that that he put into Citizen Kane or Magnificent Ambersons.
Right. So, but I was getting to why it's your favorite movie. So, what does it mean to you?
Touch of Evil
Yeah.
or
Touch of Evil.
just well, like I was saying, the story, I find the story of how Wells made it incredibly touching. No, the actual plot of the movie does not resonate with me or move me, which I realize might sound antithetical because I do feel that a good movie should move you, should stir you emotionally or intellectually. And I don't know that Touch of Evil does, but it's
So it
just the full package.
so it's his passion about making it that
I
inspires
think
you.
that's it. And
Right.
and 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 you can say almost the same thing about probably one of my other favorite movies. I mean, not probably, definitely one of my other favorite movies. One of the films that made me become want to become a filmmaker is Jaws.
Sure.
Jaws doesn't particularly move me emotionally or inspire me intellectually, but I get wrapped up in the craft. In later years, I've come to see it as I know I'm kind of stretching here, but a study in class dynamics because you have, a working class man of nature, a middle class man of law, and an upper class man of science who all are forced into this tiny, literal, almost literal microcosm where
Right.
they have to work together. They have to put aside their differences to get the job done. And I find that really inspiring because I would like to see more of that in real life. But
Right.
Jaws is just a cool movie,
Yeah.
extremely well made.
You reminded me of one of my other questions because you mentioned the craft of a movie like Jaws, and is it harder for you to watch movies when you're so used to reading screenplays and you've been on film sets and you know a lot about the business? Is it harder to watch a movie when the analytical part of your brain is working, or
It's pretty hard. I can get to a place where I generally enjoy movies, but I'm always watching movies from two perspectives. I really do try to pay attention to the story. I love movies. I love to get swept up in a plot and everything. But I'm always, yeah, I've been ruined by my study and my actual working on movies because I will see a movie and think, well, why did they do that shot and what's that about? And that was a bad cut. And more and more lately, I'm tickled by, when I see actors delivering passionate speeches or teaching lessons, and they exude such confidence in the subject matter they're talking about. But at the same time, I'm thinking like, wow, this guy really seems like he's a brilliant professor. And then I remind myself, no, he's not a brilliant professor. This is an actor pretending to be a brilliant professor.
right,
And all these things coming out of his head are not his own thoughts. They're lines he has learned.
right? And yet, it sounds like you still have your passion for movies in spite of
Sure.
that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I just I don't like anything else. I like movies and sports, and pizza. But yeah, I'll always watch movies. There's movies I'm looking forward to. Every time I put on a movie, I'm hopeful. I hope that I love it.
Yeah,
Um, I'm also, though, incredibly skeptical, cynical, and pessimistic.
yeah,
I think by nature most movies are not good,
mm,
or by nature most movies are average.
yeah. That's very true.
Hmm.
When I keep a list of all the movies I watch, and
Really?
yeah, well, I it's kind of an OCD thing, I guess, and uh, also I want to try to avoid watching something I've already seen, and sometimes I don't remember, so then I can check the list and go, wait, I saw this one. But
Yeah, well, I relate to there are few things I hate more than finding a movie to watch, put it on, and then realize that I've seen it already.
yeah, so I'm trying to avoid that. But what I was getting at is that I looked over my list for last year, and there was hardly anything that stood out. There were, because I watch movies every day, so I had at least 365 movies that I watched last year, and there were maybe three or four of them that stood out in my memory. I couldn't even remember the
Mm,
rest of them.
yeah, that's tough. The filmmaker, a guy who I really like in general, Steven Soderbergh. Now people look forward to it. He puts out an annual list of everything he's watched, and because he's such a hardcore filmmaker and film lover, he will, I mean, he'll watch Jaws several times a year. But he'll watch new stuff, but he'll also watch old stuff too, things he's
Yeah,
seen before. There's clearly things he watches every year.
right. There are a couple of other topics I want to touch on, and then we'll try to wrap it up, I think.
Sure.
But
Okay.
we haven't talked about horror movies yet, and I know
Oh,
that's how we reconnected. And
right.
you were telling me about how deep and lifelong your passion for horror movies is. So
Yeah.
can you comment on that?
Sure. I mean, it's a good thing I'm not on trial here or something, but um
Yes, tell us about your interest in horror movies, Mr.
I mean,
Greenberg.
when you think about it, yeah, somebody who willingly chooses to sit down and be entertained by mayhem and murder and bloodshed and stuff like that, on one level might have a screw loose. On another level, I've actually spoken with a friend of mine who is a clinical psychologist by day, but writes horror, writes horror stories and makes horror films in his off time. And I had heard this, and he confirmed to me that there can be something beneficial to watching horror because it allows us a safe opportunity to exercise feelings and emotions and explore those situations in a safe space that we might not normally get to. Very few of us, thankfully, have the experience of being, pursued by a slobbering psychopath through an abandoned mental institution
You mean you
or
haven't?
something. I haven't, not yet, but
That just happened to me last week.
I'm still young. Well, not really. But So yeah, horror movies. I like the thrill. As a kid, I was attracted to the monsters. Also, movies in general, but horror movies in particular, are about people doing the wrong thing. And, sometimes it's fun to live vicariously through characters who do the things that you yourself are too moral and ethical to do.
Right.
So I kind of like seeing that. Now, I got to a point in the last, 20 years, maybe longer, where I actually found myself being really bored by horror movies. I felt like they'd become really stagnant. And I was less interested in the horror elements and more interested in the elements that happen between the scary parts. Like,
Right.
who are these characters? What have they done to find themselves in a situation where horror movie antics and scenarios are happening to them?
Right. I guess I've told you that I don't like violence and I have problems with slasher movies. So
Mhm.
yeah, so I think it's the things between the kills that have to hold my interest.
Exactly. So characters, situations, that sort of thing. Yeah, I don't like gore.
Yeah.
Gore is, and we could probably have spent a whole hour talking about horror, and I think we've probably already had the conversation numerous times in the car, where I feel like some people make horror films, and I know a lot of horror filmmakers. I'm really connected to that world, especially in, our geographic region where the two of us live. And there are people whose primary motivation for making these films is to experiment with and explore gore techniques. And to
Right.
me, that's just not a reason to make a movie.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, yeah, and I find it boring, and with just seeing buckets of blood on screen is not storytelling to me. It's cheap spectacle.
Mm.
So and I know we've talked about how your interest is primarily in classic films, but I think I've we've talked about how we're in this era now, and I know some people hate the term, but I can't think of another way of describing it. People are calling it elevated horror. So right now, the last 10, 15 years, there's been this wave of sort of intellectual and artsy horror movies out there.
Yeah.
Many of them really pretty good.
Mm. Well, I
Um,
haven't seen the recent ones, so I wouldn't know.
sure. The Witch, there's a film from about 10 years ago called The Witch by Robert Eggers, who's currently in, the public eye because his adaptation of Nosferatu came out on Christmas,
Mm.
which is pretty good. But The Witch is in the genre that a lot of people are now calling folk horror. It's a period piece, I believe, set in 1600s or 1700s Massachusetts, basically the Pilgrims, kind of definitely shades of the Crucible and Salem witch trials in it, but it's a small farming community uh centered story, and without giving it away, for somebody who watches a lot of horror movies and can see everything coming and is usually pretty blasé, my jaw dropped at the end. And
Mm.
I mean, this is a family show, so I'm not going to quote myself directly. And I'm somebody who does not curse a lot, but I cursed and I
Mm.
said, "This is fill in the blank scary."
Oh.
I was really scared at the end. It was pretty terrifying. So there's interesting things going on in horror. One of the best films I've seen lately, period, and also probably I go down as saying is one of my favorite horror movies, even though a lot of people don't call it horror, is this 2022 film called Soft and Quiet, which
I've never
on
heard of it.
this on the, it's a low budget indie film, all shot in one take. That's a whole other story. But it's it's about a group of women getting together for coffee, and
Oh, that's really
uh,
scary.
that's pretty scary. The coffee part is not that bad, but where
Well, if
this
it's bad
movie
coffee.
goes, yeah, where this movie goes, it went to some. I was watching the movie thinking to myself, please don't, please don't. Oh, they're not going to do this. They're not going to do this, and they do. So it was a pretty intense, just really, really brilliant filmmaking.
Mm.
So,
So if you had to name your maybe top two or three horror movies, what are they?
oh, good question. Top or two horror movies. Wow. Boy, you really are banging out the good ones.
Mm.
Gosh. Okay. I don't know if this is top one or two, but this is what's going to come out now. I mean, John Carpenter's The Thing is widely regarded by many as the best horror movie of all time, and it's great. It's good. It's a masterpiece. It's not, it almost feels a little too obvious to include it. The aforementioned American Werewolf in London, I
Yeah.
loved because it has a lot of heart and soul. As a screenwriting teacher, I teach good stories come from good characters. And you don't expect to be moved and touched and stirred emotionally by a horror movie, but holy moly, that scene where he calls home to talk to his family because he knows his fate and he doesn't want to tell them, and he's talking to his little sister or something. He knows it's just heartbreaking, heartbreaking. So
Yeah,
that's really good.
that's a great movie. I love that one too.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
On the opposite end of the spectrum, and I think we just talked about this earlier this week, was the really cheesy Prom Night,
Yeah.
which I have deep affection for. Can I actually call it a favorite horror movie? It's a favorite horror movie with an asterisk because it's in no way, shape, or form a good movie.
It's your
So
favorite cheesy horror movie.
it's favorite
Yeah.
cheesy horror movie.
Yeah.
Yes, because as I was telling you, it coming out in 1979, 1980, it combined the two hottest yet trashiest movements in pop culture of the time, disco music and slasher movies. So it's a disco
Right.
slasher. I really like Tremors. Have you ever seen Tremors?
No, I've heard the name.
Oh, Tremors is fun. That's a horror comedy, straight up horror comedy. Concept they just really nail it. Oh, so many to choose from. Don't Look Now. Did you ever see Don't Look Now? Early
No,
70s.
no.
Yeah, I wasn't sure where your era goes to. Guarantee your parents have seen it, and ask your parents about Don't Look Now.
Okay.
Um, uh, you know, I give, you know, when I saw it, I loved it. I don't and I recognize its place in the canon. Halloween, I
Sure.
guess I can give it some credit. And I was just thinking of another one. Blanking. Too many to choose from.
Oh well.
It's funny. I don't. Jaws often gets qualified as a horror movie. I
Yeah.
don't think of it as a horror movie. I call it a thriller or adventure.
Well, it's funny. The first time I went to the Chiller Theater Convention, Richard Dreyfuss was there, and
Oh, really?
some people were debating whether Jaws is a horror movie or not. So I've heard that before.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah.
It is a monster per se.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know.
fair enough.
Yeah, I'll probably email you in the middle of the night with like the names of 20 other horror movies I
Yeah,
like.
probably. Well, the audience won't get to hear the rest of the list
No,
then.
right, exactly.
Well, there are a couple other topics I want to touch on.
Sure.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about your writing yet. We've been talking about
Oh,
all the
yeah,
other stuff.
right.
So I know most of your screenplays are written on assignment, and
hmm
it sounds like you turn them out pretty quickly. So, what's your process when you get an assignment? How do you get go through it?
Yeah, I wish I had a process. I probably should have a more formal process. Over the summer, I was hired to write a screenplay. And traditionally, typically, when you get hired to write a screenplay, the standard turnaround time is about 12 weeks. So I asked the guy, okay, when do you need the screenplay? And he said, can you have it for me in a week? So I had a week to write a feature. And I just said, okay, I'm going to bear down and do it. And I kind of worked round the clock. And I like to brag a little bit, in that I had a week to write it and I turned it in a day early.
Oh, there you go.
Um, so it was, on one level, it was physically demanding. It was really physically and mentally demanding,
I would
a little
think.
bit emotionally demanding because, I was seeing someone at the time and I was like, hey, you know, I got this gig. Do you mind if you don't see me for a week or so? And she was fine with that. Um, but there were times working on it where there was elation. I really felt like I had, before I was talking about how sometimes I feel like an athlete and sometimes I don't have it. There were times writing this screenplay where I really felt like I had it, and I actually felt like I was on a physical ride as I was writing it because, not to get too touchy-feely, earthy, crunchy, but the muse was really coming through me.
Hmm.
At the same time, just this past week, just a few days ago, I'm working on a screenplay. I got up in the morning and I didn't have all that much on my agenda for the day. So I thought, good, I'll get a lot of writing done. And I go to write in the morning and it just wasn't happening.
Yeah.
Even physically, I just didn't feel like my head was on. I tried a couple times over the course of the day. It just wasn't working. And it's hard because the subject matter of this particular film is really unpleasant,
Hmm.
and the characters and the places and the actions I'm writing about are really ugly and disturbing to be. And also, it's a true story. But something clicked. Something clicked late in the day, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I tried again, and boom, I was locked in. I cranked out 15 solid pages that I'm really happy with.
Wow.
And so you just never know. It really is, and again, not to be too sports talky, but you just don't know when you're going to have your stuff. There was a pitcher for the Philadelphia Phillies years ago, Cole Hamels, and over the course of two starts, two games he was playing, he gave up 19 runs, which is a lot. Um, then his next game, he pitched a no-hitter, meaning that nobody hit the ball the whole game. It's a great game. So he went from having two incredibly bad games to having one incredibly good game. And I guess I thought every day, all three of those games, he came to the stadium prepared, whatnot, ready to go. And two times it really blew up in his face and he struggled and he bombed. And the next time it clicked and and he made magic. He achieved something most pitchers never achieve, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, again, I can relate. I mean, especially because I'm a comedy writer. Sometimes I
Mm,
can come up with things that are funny, and other times it's just not working and it's not funny.
right. And sometimes, I mean, in that particular uh, mode, it's really hard to be funny if you're not in a funny mood.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a whole other muse. I mean, I'm writing hardcore gritty drama now, and it's not that hard to get into that that mode. Like I said on this particular case a few days ago, it just, it just felt like I was my keyboard was covered with a foot of mud. I just couldn't type. My brain wasn't working.
Hmm. Yeah, I do know the feeling. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
get it. Yeah.
It's not an exact science either. We're
Right.
pulling things. We have this brain inside our heads, and we can will it to do whatever we want all all day. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be there.
Well, whenever somebody brings up zombies eating people's brains, I say, well, they can have mine. I'm not getting much use out of it these days.
I relate. I definitely
Yeah.
relate.
So, oh, I was also curious whether you've written for other mediums. Have you written plays, anything in theater or radio or
Um,
anything like that?
wrote a couple very, very short plays, like excuse me, like 1 minute, 2 minute, like 2, 3 page plays, very short, which is interesting because I really cut my teeth in the theater. I
Did
did a
that
lot of
hurt?
theater. Yeah. I cut and to this day, I cite more playwrights as influences than I do screenwriters.
Yeah.
Um, I wrote a pilot for a TV show, and I guess that's it. And oh well, I've done documentaries too.
Okay, I was just curious about that, so I guess it's kind of a throwaway question, but
Hmm. No, and
uh,
it's worth it. No, it's actually not because there's a school of thought that says you should be a specialist. Um, I'm what people would call a generalist because I write anything.
sure.
If somebody hires me, I write whatever I get hired to. And people tell me that will be detrimental in the end to my career because I don't have a brand.
Right.
Whereas some people are like, oh, so and so is a great horror writer, such and such is a great rom-com writer, and you can't say that about me.
Right. Well, you've done what 60 plus screenplays, so I guess
Something like
you
that.
have the credentials, even if you may not
Yeah.
have the brand, but you have the experience.
But yeah, I mean, I'll write anything. At this point, I say I've written everything. I have not written science fiction. I've not written a Western in the conventional sense, although I did write something that is a kind of spin on High Noon, which is one of my favorite Westerns, maybe one of my favorite films, period. But it's not set it's set in the West, but not the Old West.
Yeah. Oh, I forget what I was going to say there. Oh, I remember that. Most of my writing has been for radio. I assume you
Oh
haven't done
yeah.
anything for
I
radio.
have not. I don't even know how to begin that, but that's something I'd like to hear about. One thing I do, as a matter of fact, on my list of things to do today that I just remembered I haven't done was applying for a job writing video games.
Oh yeah, I don't know anything about that really, but
I know
if
very, very little about it. I hope the employer's not listening to this, but I have a working knowledge of it. But video game producers are more and more hiring screenwriters, people with
oh,
backgrounds in screenwriting, because industry wide, there's a shift in emphasis away from the mechanics of gameplay and a greater influence or a greater reliance on actual story.
right.
So they have good stories.
Yeah. So we're going on an hour and a half here, so I'll
Mhm.
just I have one more topic I want to
Sure.
bring up.
Yeah.
Since I called the show mostly movies, maybe music, I want to
Yeah.
talk about music a little bit because I gather that that's something else that's important in your life.
That's really important. I'm actually really glad. So I'm not a musician, and I wish I was. I took 2 years of piano, 2 years of sax, and I'm just not a musician. And I have to accept that. Just like I'm not an athlete. I wish I could be a baseball player, a football player, and I'm not. And I wish I could be a musician, and I'm not. Um, And anytime I feel like I'm less of a person or, diminished, I realize that, okay, I'm not a musician, I'm not an athlete, but guess what? Musicians and athletes like movies, and I can do that.
Right.
But beyond that, so music actually does play a very, very important part in me. So as a non-musician, I actually feel that film is music. Film, much like music, is a temporal art form. It has a beginning and an ending, and in general, you're supposed to consume it in one sitting, which means you don't want to watch a movie with me because I don't pause it. I don't get up and go to the bathroom. I don't stop to
Right.
get a snack or anything because that is not how it was meant to be experienced. So music inspires me, um, and I pay attention. So when I'm writing a screenplay, I think of it as a piece of music. It has to have ups and downs, emotional highs and lows, and it has to take you along on a journey. A film done well should be visceral. You should feel stirred in your viscera, in your loins, in your guts, but also your heart and your head. So I'm really trying to write music when I'm writing screenplays. That is my music.
You're reminding me of something Lewis Black said. He said comedy is really music for people who didn't make it as rock stars.
That's good. I had never heard that. That
Yeah,
is that's pretty accurate, I
it works
think.
for me.
Yeah, I like that. That's good.
So, who are some of your favorite artists then?
Oh, musicians?
Yeah.
Gosh. Well, for the sake of this argument, I'm gonna cite Bruce Springsteen, because I love his music and everything, but I only recently, in the last few years, discovered how important movies are to him. He finds
Hmm.
a lot of his inspiration in movies. And in fact, said his classic 1975 album that really put him on the map, Born to Run, he said he conceived of that as a film, and he thinks of the whole album as a movie that all takes place over the course of one night, and each song is a scene. And that just blew me away to hear that. That's so inspiring. So, yes, Bruce Springsteen, for the love of movies. And it just never occurred to me that because movies, I think, are in many ways the newest art. We've had
Right.
sculpture and painting and pottery and tapestry and ceramics for centuries, thousands and thousands of years. We've had movies for what, going on 130 years. And so the idea that musicians and writers could find inspiration in movies always struck me as odd, even that because movies, of course, are a combination of theater and music and writing and
Right.
literature and that kind of thing. So, yeah, it struck me as odd that musicians would find inspiration in movies, and it even goes back further. Sergei Prokofiev, the Russian classical musician, uh, found great inspiration in movies, and this is he was active in the silent film era,
Yeah.
I think, and he was inspired by movies. In fact, I think wanted to do music for movies. And I actually, it's funny, I only just saw this today, but I don't know if you're familiar with the 1970s and 80s kind of punk or new wave band Devo.
Sure. Yes.
Okay, so I just saw that Mark Mothersbaugh, the creative force behind um, Devo, makes more money from the theme song to a show that he created, some show called Ridiculousness, which I'm
Hmm.
not that familiar with. But he makes $1 million a year from that one piece of music, and that is by
Wow.
far more than he makes from any of the music he wrote, recorded, and produced with Devo.
Well, that's
So,
amazing.
the movie and Danny Elfman, the great film score composer, really, really acclaimed movie score composer,
Yep.
started out as a rock star. In fact,
Yes.
by pure coincidence, saw his band Oingo Boingo not once but twice back in the 80s, and now he's this really well-regarded film composer.
And probably makes more money from the Simpsons theme.
Oh, to Danny Elfman, he
Yeah.
does some. It's funny because when I was talking about Mark Mothersbaugh, I was thinking to myself, wait, did he do the Simpsons theme? But no, it is. Yeah, it's Danny Elfman. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think our time is about up because it's been an
Okay.
hour and a half. So
Sure.
thank you. It's been really fun, Dave.
Oh, it's
Thank you
been
so
so much
much.
fun. It's been great. It's been great. Happy to talk with you. If you, I don't know if you do this. Do you want me to give you my website if anybody wants to get in touch with
Oh,
me or
yeah. I should.
anything?
I should. Before I let you go, I should ask if you have anything to promote.
Oh, it's just my services as a screenwriter. You want to make a movie, call me and pay me up front. No. I don't. I mean, I should. I had a movie out last year, and I'm not going to talk about it because I'm not all that happy with it. And honestly, I'm distancing myself from it a little bit, so I'm not promoting that, even though I should. I mean, I don't benefit from it if people see it, so whatever. But oh, you know what I do? Yeah, I want to promote. 'Cause I don't know who your audience is.
I
You
don't
know,
either.
let's get to know the audience. So my niche, my passion, my specialty is ultra, ultra low budget films.
Right.
And so I will say that I have literally written the book on writing screenplays for low budget films. And so I have a book out called Screenwriting for Micro Budget Films. And
Right.
unless there's many movie moguls watching this, I suspect there's not. I suspect anybody watching this is probably in the early stages of pursuing a film career, and
I thought you were going to say the early stages of dementia, but
no, that's
that would
me.
probably be my audience.
That's me. But everybody likes the movies. And a lot of people dream of making movies, and a lot of people don't really go know what goes into the practical nuts and bolts, ins and outs of getting a movie made. The screenplay is really only, maybe 25% of the equation. So anyway, if for people who think they might want to make a movie, and it is increasingly easier and easier to make some kind of movie, most people have a film studio in their phone.
Right.
You can make decent films on phone, but it's less a matter of just not spending that much money to make a film, and more about conceiving a film for a low budget. That's a little bit tricky. So any of the people who are watching this and might want to consider making a movie are probably going to be making a low budget movie. So I would recommend reading my book.
Right. Well, you sent part of it to me, so I'll recommend it too.
Okay, great, good.
And your website is davidjgreenberg.com. Did I get that right?
David davidjgreenberg.com. There's a lot of David Greenbergs in the movie business, so I've had to go with the J.
Well, there's only one David Greenberg that I know, and it's been a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, good way to end it. Thanks. It was a pleasure. Maybe we'll do it again.
I hope so.
Okay,
Take
thanks.
care, my friend.
All right, you too. Be well.